General Hospital will reveal when Sonny was attacked right inside his hospital room, what should have been the safest place after all he had been through. Everyone initially assumed it was just another personal retaliation, another twist in the violent spiral that had always surrounded his life. But the truth was far darker and more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. A man disguised as a nurse, highly trained in carrying a poison syringe designed to kill within seconds, quietly entered that room. Had it not been for Brick's vigilant instincts, always on high alert when it came to Sonny, the outcome would have been fatal. Brick burst in at the critical moment, subduing the assassin just before the needle could pierce Sonny's skin. That action didn't just save Sonny's life, it triggered a domino effect of questions with no immediate answers. Who sent the killer? Why strike now? And, most chilling of all, why were all traces seemingly erased after the attack? That's when the WSB, renowned for their deep penetration and investigation capabilities, jumped into action after receiving Brick's emergency call. But what raised even more eyebrows was that Brennan, formerly an adversary of Sonny, was nearby, just blocks away from the hospital. His presence wasn't coincidental. And it certainly wasn't out of vague concern for Carly, as many believed. In truth, Brennan had been conducting an independent investigation, off the books from WSB, into a series of suspicious events occurring both in Port Charles and Los Angeles, targeted assassination attempts, large-scale anonymous financial transfers, and the unexplained fire at Sonny's penthouse. Using his experience and instincts as a seasoned agent, Brennan began to see that all these seemingly unrelated incidents were in fact connected by a shadowy figure whose name few had spoken aloud, Sidwell. Who was Sidwell? On the surface, a successful entrepreneur with a clean public profile, a generous philanthropist known for his civic engagements. But the deeper Brennan dug, the clearer it became that Sidwell's public persona was a facade. No civilian records prior to 5 years ago. No biological markers in any system. No photographic evidence from traffic or surveillance cameras. No official education records. A perfectly crafted identity, that's what tipped Brennan off. Sidwell wasn't just anyone. He was the product of a meticulously orchestrated cover-up. Cross-referencing intelligence from Eastern Europe and underground Russian networks, Brennan finally connected the final dots. Sidwell was a direct descendant of the Cassadine family, a name synonymous with treachery, legacy crimes, and dark ambitions. Armed with this chilling truth, Brennan realized he could no longer work alone. He needed the one man who could counter Sidwell's resources and reach in the criminal underworld, Sonny. Their meeting wasn't easy. They carried with them a long history of distrust, resentment, and deep personal wounds. Brennan had once put Carly in danger, while Sonny trusted no one beyond his tightly knit circle. But once Brennan laid out the hard evidence, Sidwell's real identity, maps detailing bioweapon transportation, proof of political infiltration and municipal manipulation, Sonny had no choice but to accept that the threat they faced was greater than anything he had ever encountered. This was no mob war. No turf battle. This was the planned eradication of Port Charles, physically, economically, and culturally. Sonny understood that he couldn't defeat a threat like Sidwell using traditional methods. Sidwell wasn't a gangster, he was a revolutionary with access to advanced weaponry, digital networks, and the fanatical ideology of a Cassadine determined to rebuild the world in his family's twisted image. Determined to protect his family, his city, and the principles he secretly held dear. Sonny agreed to the alliance. With the reach of WSB and the underground intelligence of Sonny's loyal contacts, the two men began tracing every transaction tied to Sidwell over the past 3 years, leading them to abandoned warehouses equipped with state-of-the-art security systems. A bankrupt pharmaceutical company still licensed for virus research, and a charity front funneling massive, untraceable donations. Each clue they uncovered painted a more terrifying picture. Sidwell wasn't just infiltrating Port Charles, he was planning to annihilate it. Beneath a seemingly harmless medical research facility on the city's outskirts lay a covert laboratory prepared to release a bioengineered virus through the sewer system. Mercenaries trained in Africa and Eastern Europe had entered the city posing as legal residents. The local banking system had been compromised, poised to siphon out citizens' funds in seconds. Even worse, certain key officials, ones Sonny had once trusted, had been bought off or outright replaced with imposters. Brennan and Sonny, once polar opposites, had to become two sides of the same coin. Brennan's strategic mind and intelligence skills merged with Sonny's decisive instincts and street-savvy grit to form a resistance force Sidwell never saw coming. But before facing him directly, they were forced to confront a devastating truth: how many people in Port Charles were already under Sidwell's control? Was it already too late to save the city? It was at this moment they made a pact, a decision from which neither could return. No mercy. No hesitation. No failure. Because if they didn't succeed, Port Charles would cease to exist, buried not just in rubble, but in the shadow that the Cassadine bloodline had cast for generations. Eventually, the trail of cryptic evidence, every intercepted message, every hacked financial transaction, every mysterious vanishing, led Brennan and Sonny to a revelation so staggering. It defied everything they thought they knew about power, vengeance, and legacy in Port Charles. Sidwell, the enigmatic young mogul who had for years moved through elite social circles cloaked in wealth, charm, and philanthropic intent, was not merely another ambitious player in the city's shadowy hierarchy. Beneath his meticulously curated public image lay a lineage that had haunted Port Charles for generations. Sidwell was a direct descendant of the Cassadine family, one of the most infamous and malevolent bloodlines in the history of General Hospital, a name whispered with fear. Its legacy steeped in betrayal, madness, and unspeakable cruelty. This was not merely a distant familial connection or a diluted branch of the Cassadine tree. Sidwell was born of the central vein of that poisonous dynasty, carrying not only its genetic code but its ideology, its obsessions, and its fury. For years, he had operated under assumed identities, concealing his ancestry, erasing digital footprints, and living in the shadows while watching the city that had once stood defiant against his family's tyranny flourish into a community that had all but forgotten the terror of the Cassadine name. But Sidwell had not forgotten. In his mind, Port Charles had not just resisted the Cassadines, it had humiliated them, condemned their ambitions, and attempted to bury their history beneath civic pride and modern progress. What Brennan and Sonny uncovered was more than a criminal conspiracy, it was the resurrection of a vendetta. Sidwell had spent nearly a decade orchestrating the silent infiltration of every major institution in Port Charles. Through blackmail, bribery, and brainwashing, he had embedded loyal operatives into the city's police department, its judicial courts, the administrative boards of General Hospital, and even its leading media outlets. The Cassadine symbol, once feared but now dismissed as legend, had become an invisible watermark behind every corrupt decision, every sudden disappearance, every derailed investigation. From City Hall to hospital corridors, his reach was absolute. But Sidwell's ultimate ambition was not to control Port Charles, it was to erase it. In his twisted philosophy, nurtured through generations of inherited bitterness and a warped sense of justice, the city's very existence was a stain on the honor of the Cassadine name. He viewed its destruction not as a crime, but as a correction, a sacrificial cleansing to restore what he called the true order that had been lost when the Cassadines were defeated. Port Charles, in Sidwell's vision, was not a home or a haven, it was a symbol of rebellion that had to be wiped clean, its ashes scattered, its people either subjugated or destroyed. What Brennan and Sonny discovered in encrypted files and intercepted transmissions was chilling in its precision. Sidwell had designed a multi-phase operation known internally as Project Phoenix, a name that suggested rebirth, but only after total incineration. The plan included a coordinated series of cyber attacks aimed at disabling the city's infrastructure, targeted bioterrorism using a synthetic pathogen designed in an offshore lab. and the detonation of explosive devices planted near utility centers to simulate natural disasters and delay emergency response. More horrifying still, he intended to broadcast the event live through hijacked media networks, not as a threat, but as a manifesto, a declaration that the Cassadines had returned, and Port Charles had fallen. Each layer of the plan revealed a deeper commitment to annihilation. There were no ransom notes, no demands for power or money, only silence followed by extermination. Sidwell had recruited mercenaries trained in psychological warfare, indoctrinated children in secret compounds outside the city, and weaponized medical research initially intended for rare disease treatment. He had even begun to manipulate stock markets to crash local businesses post-destruction, ensuring that nothing of the current city would survive, not its identity, not its wealth, not even its memory. What made Sidwell's plot all the more terrifying was how close he had come to achieving it. He had been sitting at charity banquets with city leaders, shaking hands with the hospital board, dining with Port Charles elites who never suspected that they were breaking bread with a man who had signed their death warrants months earlier. His charm was disarming, his donations generous, his presence calculated to lower every guard. He didn't just fool the city, he seduced it, coaxed it into trusting him, embracing him, even celebrating him. And yet, it was that same arrogance that became the fatal flaw in his design. By embedding himself so deeply into the fabric of Port Charles, Sidwell underestimated the city's resilience, and more importantly, the instincts of those who had spent a lifetime surviving the darkest parts of it. Sonny, with his unshakable street sense and unforgiving loyalty, and Brennan, with his meticulous intelligence and determination, were the last line of defense against an enemy who believed he had already won. Sidwell's plan, fueled by bloodline obsession and centuries-old grudges, had almost gone undetected, masked behind legal foundations, scientific research, and political maneuvering. But once the truth was exposed, once Brennan and Sonny connected every strand of the tangled web, the full scale of the threat became impossible to ignore. The Cassadines had returned. Not with swords or poisons or weather machines, but with data, disease, and deception. Now, with time running out and the lives of thousands hanging in the balance, the mission was clear. Sidwell had to be stopped, not just for Port Charles, but for every future generation that deserved to live free from the ghosts of the past. The battle wasn't just against a man, it was against a legacy. And this time, that legacy would not rise again. Sonny and Brennan, though they came from vastly different worlds, one a feared mob boss who ruled Port Charles's criminal underworld, the other a seasoned agent operating in the shadows of global intelligence, found a common ground when confronted with the chilling truth about Sidwell. This threat was no longer confined to personal vendettas or power struggles. It was a calculated, premeditated genocide, carefully planned by a man who no longer viewed human lives as sacred, but as disposable pawns in the grand chess game of restoring the Cassadine legacy. As Brennan decrypted lines of complex code and analyzed intelligence reports from embedded agents in global finance networks, he and Sonny began to uncover the full scope of Sidwell's bioterrorism plot. At the heart of it was a genetically engineered virus, one that didn't just kill, but mutated as it spread, bypassing the human immune system and adapting to treatments. This virus had been secretly developed over 3 years in an underground laboratory buried beneath a seemingly innocuous civilian medical center on the outskirts of the city. The lab was built with state-of-the-art radiation shielding and soundproofing. Its staff consisted of missing scientists from around the world, kidnapped or blackmailed into advancing a pathogen designed not to cure, but to obliterate. But Sidwell's ambitions went even further. He had orchestrated a series of explosives planted throughout key infrastructure points in Port Charles, electrical substations, communications towers, emergency dispatch centers. These were rigged to trigger in a cascading effect, plunging the city into chaos the moment the virus was released. There would be no power, no communication, no medical response. And worst of all, many of the personnel, janitors, hospital techs, even law enforcement officers, had already been replaced with loyal agents conditioned to ensure the plan's success. Brennan's timeline analysis showed the entire operation was set to launch within 72 hours. His models predicted a mortality rate of over 90%. Faced with such apocalyptic consequences, Brennan made a career-ending choice. He accessed top-secret clearance protocols to summon a shadow unit, one known only to a handful within the WSB, designed to intercept threats with extinction-level potential. Meanwhile, Sonny leveraged every ounce of influence he had, activating old contacts in weapons trades, surveillance, and even former Cassadine informants. Together, they waged a desperate race against time. Every hour slipping away like a countdown to mass death. The final confrontation took place deep beneath the city, inside a fortified control hub where Sidwell had locked himself away. Surrounded by screens streaming live surveillance of the city he planned to annihilate. As Brennan and Sonny breached the chamber, Sidwell didn't flinch. He stood tall, arrogant, confident, believing his Cassadine blood made him untouchable, his legacy immortal. The room pulsed with red emergency lights, illuminating his face like a ghost risen from hell. Sonny. No longer just a mob kingpin but a father who had known the agony of losing a child to vengeance, faced Sidwell with cold resolve. He didn't come for justice. He came for an end. Brennan, precise and unemotional, began dismantling the command center, hacking into the server's root architecture, disabling failsafes, and downloading every byte of evidence, ensuring the entire network would collapse in on itself. But just as they believed they had seized control, Sidwell reached for a secondary trigger, a manual release device for the virus, hidden in a steel case near his desk. With his hand on the activation switch, Brennan fired. One shot, clean and final, pierced Sidwell's chest, severing not just the man but the fanatical ambition that had burned in his blood. Sidwell fell, hatred still flickering in his eyes. But his body was the last remnant of a dream buried in the dust. As the elite WSB tactical unit stormed the compound, their high-tech gear illuminating every crevice, they uncovered containers of the virus, detonators rigged to street-level manholes, and a digital map of Port Charles marked for destruction. The city had been minutes away from annihilation. The mission had succeeded, but not without consequence. Brennan, now a rogue in the eyes of the agency, silently collected the encrypted files and critical data he knew would change the direction of the WSB forever. But in his mind lingered one image, Carly. No longer just a mission objective. She had become a memory that pulled him off the safety of protocol and into the fire, where he rediscovered something worth dying for, purpose. Sonny remained behind, standing in the quiet aftermath. Eyes lifted to the city skyline. Port Charles still pulsed with life, unaware of how close it had come to extinction. He knew no one would thank him. No one would even understand what had truly happened. But for Sonny, it was enough to know that a child could still chase a dream down a sidewalk. That a mother could still take her child to the park, that the city he once ruled with an iron fist had been spared by his sacrifice. Once, he had destroyed. Today, he had protected. Not for glory, but for love. The alliance between Sonny and Brennan, forged in necessity and unlikely to ever be repeated, proved one immutable truth: in the darkest hour, when all seems lost, even enemies can stand together for what matters most. The Cassadine shadow had fallen. Sidwell was dead. And Port Charles, scarred but standing, was still alive.